So we saw some problems just now of things that can go wrong, and often it's because the information passed in doesn't match the information that's expected by the function. But there is a way around that where you can specify the function doesn't have to have all the information that it needs. Sometimes it can default to certain things. And the way to do that, so it can be invoked with different numbers of arguments each time. The way to do that is to define a default for when a parameter is not passed in. So imagine you've got a function with 3 parameters. If we say one of these, the default for this value, for this parameter is going to be something, then the calling code, the invoking code, doesn't need to pass that parameter in. And here's the example. So in this version, we've got this calculate function. It's got number 1, number 2, and notice this third one says operation equals plus, and that when you see that equals in the definition of a function, that tells you that it's setting a default, and that means that if the operation isn't passed in as an argument, that value will default to plus. So if the calling code passes in 2 values, there'll be number 1, number 2, and the operation will default to plus. If it passes in 3, then it's passing in number 1, number 2, and the operation. Okay, so here's some code that uses that version, slightly artificial version of the code. So if we do a calculation using that calculate function, we pass in 3 values, then they can be whatever we want. They can be the 2 numbers that the user's put in, and it can be plus or minus for the operation, and that would work as normal. If we just wanted to do addition, we only need because that operation defaults to a plus symbol, we only need to pass in number 1 and number 2. So on this line here, if I'm just doing addition, I just pass in the number 1 plus number 2, and that will then do the calculation as if the operation had been passed in as a plus, because that's the default, and then it does addition. Okay, so you can see when I do these two, when I run this code here, if I give it 3 and 2 as the 2 numbers, excuse me, and put in minus, then the answer is 1. 3 minus 2 is 1. But the addition, if I add those 2 things together using the default operation of plus, I get 5. Okay, just to go back to the problems we can get with the code, because that was a little aside about how we can put in default values. One other problem you can get with setting up functions is that you might forget to return a value. So if I forget to return a value to the invoking code, then it's going to run. It will run, and it won't crash. Actually, it won't crash. It will just won't give you the exact answer you expect, because it's done the calculation. It'll do the calculation that you asked it to do, but you haven't passed it back to the invoking code, and so the invoking code, when it's trying to store the result of that calculate function, it won't have the right value. There you are. If I try and add 2 and 2, it returns the answer none, because nothing has been stored in the variable combination in the invoking code. Okay, so these are all examples. I think it's worth running them all and just verifying for yourself what happens when they run, because there's nothing like getting a bit of experience with that happening to really make sense of where things can go wrong and what kind of error message you get. So today then we've covered functions and writing our own functions. We've already been using functions quite a lot. We've used print and input and so on. Today we've covered how we write our own. So we've covered declaring them and invoking them. That's the 2 sides of the coin, really. So declaring is where we say what the function does, and invoking is where we use it. We've talked about arguments and parameters. Arguments are the information we pass to the function, which can be different every time, and parameters are the things that the function, from the function's point of view, what it's been given. Just to remind you, if you see the keyword def, then that's declaring a function. If you see a function name plus some brackets, that's almost certainly invoking a function. And to remind you, those are passed from the invoking code and passed into the function. Although, as I said, parameters and arguments are often used interchangeably as words. And we've seen where things can go wrong when you implement functions. There's lots of examples there. I'm sure I make plenty of mistakes when I'm creating functions. It's just a case of knowing how to fix them.